South Africa used to have shareholder activists. Going back some years ago, the Shareholders Association in the country was very active. Well, that seems to have passed by for at least the last decade. We've seen nothing. However, Steinhoff shareholders seem to be reacting quite positively to a German Shareholders Association, the biggest one in that country, which has taken a particular interest in this Steinhoff matter. We have Dr Marc Liebscher with us today. He's with SDK, which is the Shareholders Association, and he'll give us an update on how things are progressing against Steinhoff after that shock vote at the annual general meeting where the management and board's proposals were all voted down. Dr. Liebscher, thanks for joining us again today for a follow-up. After our last interview, I think there were quite a few thousand people who watched the discussion that we have. Did you have much interest from South African shareholders?
Yes, South African shareholders reached out to us, wanted more information, and actually we had a very good response after the conversation. So thank you so much for that, Alec.
Well, that's good. Let's see if we can move one step closer to some kind of a solution here. You do have a process which is now going through whereby the board of Steinhoff and management are trying to force through something which you are not. You're saying to shareholders they should vote against. Just for matter of clarity, what exactly is it that they're trying to do that you don't like?
Well, they presented a restructuring plan to the creditors and shareholders, and this restructuring plan has the idea that the shareholders will not get any value out of the shares of Steinhoff. And in the AGM, in the general meeting of the shareholders, we voted against this restructuring plan. And what the company now is trying to do, they're trying to push through this plan, the so-called favour proceedings. It's out of court, out of insolvency proceeding, where the company proposes the restructuring plan, and creditors and shareholders can vote in different groups if they accept this plan. And if shareholders and creditors would accept this plan would go through, and we would see that it's very negative for the shareholders.
But if you've already voted against it, or shareholders have already voted against it with your support and on your recommendation at the annual general meeting, how can this now go through?
Well, we will see. The shareholders will have to vote in their group, so we're calling out to all the shareholders in Germany and in South Africa to vote against this plan. The voting period has started a week ago and is still running for another week. So everybody who has shares in South Africa, please be advised, go to the website of Steinhoff Company. I think, Alec, you can show the website of Steinhoff Company with the information for the voting also in your show notes. And you have the possibility to vote until the 24th of May against the proposed restructuring plan. There are some technical prerequisites for this. You have to produce an identification, you have to produce a shareholder certificate, but that is quite easy for you to do and extensively and easily to understand, explained on Steinhoff's website. So shareholders should vote in their group against this restructuring plan. We will see if the shareholders, again, as it happened in Amsterdam, will vote with an overwhelming majority against this plan, what we hope, what we are calling for. And if they do, then this whole thing goes into another step, into another court proceeding. Then the Dutch court, restructuring court, will look at the voting and will decide if he accepts the plan or says, we think the voting of the shareholders is relevant, so the plan will not go forward. But the first step is to vote against the plan now during this voting period.
So that's interesting what you've just mentioned now. So if shareholders do vote against it on the basis that they're not getting a fair deal from Steinhoff, then it can still be pushed through by a judge.
The court could overrule this anti-voting by the shareholder group. The court could overrule this dissent by the shareholders if the court was convinced that the offer is fair to the shareholders. So the court would make up his mind. Perhaps he would even hear professionals and witnesses to find out if the planned restructuring is fair to shareholders. And if the court is convinced it is fair to shareholders, then the court can overrule the dissenting vote of the shareholders.
So there's
and
nothing
we will
you
try to make clear to the court that it's not fair. So that is what we will do in the court hearing now.
But if you lose there, you lose it all.
If we are not able to seed doubts in the minds of the judges that this is not a fair restructuring plan that Steinhoff has put on the table for the shareholders, if we are not successful in seeding doubts, then this will go through.
There have been some interesting developments over the past month. In fact, exactly a month ago, there was a court hearing in Oldenburg, which is close to where Steinhoff started, where Markus Jooste, the former chief executive of Steinhoff, as if I needed to tell you that, did not appear. He said that his passport had been taken away, or so his legal counsel said. Have you been following all of that? Because it was a really strange court hearing where Jooste's friend Evans was fined 30,000 euros, which doesn't seem like a heck of a lot of money unless there's something more to it.
Well, he was fined 30,000 euros. That is regarding what has happened, the huge financial scandal that Steinhoff was involved. That is almost nothing. So it seems that the district attorneys, that the prosecutors didn't have much substantial proof on him doing anything wrong. Regarding Jooste, well, he didn't show up. My understanding is that he's still in South Africa and he's awaiting showing up in a German court. I think that does make sense. I would try to await appearing in court in Germany as well. It seems for me that in South Africa, the district attorneys and the prosecutors are not so much pushing against him. So he seems to be better off staying in South Africa, and that's understandable. But it's really a sad and bad outcome for all the creditors, shareholders, all the investors who invested money and capital into Steinhoff and who lost that because they are very much interested to see Jooste in front of a penal court.
It is interesting, though, that Jooste surely didn't operate alone. He wasn't the Bernie Madoff of... Even Bernie Madoff had people around him.
You can't do that on your own, such a huge thing, yeah. You need accomplices. You need partners in crime. And as far as I understand it, the research and prosecution in South Africa didn't come there very far. Germany is not very much into that because somehow the Germans are saying, well, it's a South African thing, so why should we... Sorry for that. So why should we bother to put our resources into prosecuting a South African issue? So in the end, it seems a little bit like that they might get away with minor penalties after this huge heist, and this would be a fatal signal for capital markets and shareholders, climate and atmosphere and culture.
There is apparently a warrant out for Jooste's arrest now in Germany.
Yeah.
Would you, from the Shareholders Association perspective, be agitating for an extradition to Germany of the former CEO, or is this outside of your remit?
Well, it's outside of our remit. It lies in the hands of the prosecutors for sure. If we were asked, for instance, by you, by the press or by media, what's our position? Our position is Jooste must have his day in court, in penal court. And if that is in South Africa and Germany, well, that is not so much of importance. Importance is he has his day in court. It's prosecutors and the authorities are really going to the bottom of the scandal. If that is done in South Africa and Germany, we don't care, but the bottom has to be searched, and that is not done. So we are very much willing and advocating for the authorities to investigate and prosecute.
The PwC report named 8 people, I think it was, who were his accomplices, Jooste and another 7. And yet one of those has left the stage with only a 30,000 euro fine. So is it possible that we've all misled or all misjudged all of this? Because if his accomplices are walking away with very, as you said in your words, minor fines, What are we to make of it as people who are outside of the process?
We haven't looked in detail who was running the Steinhoff heist. So this is some kind of limitations that I have to make here. But it is often the case that in these huge financial scandals, the authorities and prosecutors outside of the US is another case, but in Germany and it's Europe, and it seems a little bit like as well in South Africa, that the authorities do not have the resources, the manpower, the will, the guts to fight and prosecute these huge scandals. So what we often see that the authorities are not able to stop these scandals, and then they are not able to prosecute those scandals. And that's a very, very bad thing, because in the end, it erodes the trust of the shareholders and of normal citizens in the functioning of our authorities, of our societies, of our state, and that's a very bad thing. So what we always advocate, for instance, here in Germany, I cannot say for South Africa, but here for Germany, we advocate very strongly for a concentrated, specialized prosecution service that is centered in Frankfurt and is responsible for all capital market scams in Germany. So in Germany now, every province, every state has its own competence to prosecute huge scams on capital markets, and this leads to mostly incompetent prosecutors who normally do car crashes or murders or burglaries into investigating these very complicated capital market scams. So the first step would be to have a centralized prosecution services. For instance, in Germany, it would be in Frankfurt, as our major stock exchange is centered in Frankfurt.
So getting back to Steinhoff itself, and thank you for that background and for the insight that you gave us on the process in Germany. But Steinhoff itself has been quite active ahead of this vote. And certainly in the note that you dropped me earlier ahead of this interview, you find it rather strange that Steinhoff is now selling off assets. Just explain that to us.
Yeah, quite. So we're in this war proceedings, and this is a very court-regulated proceeding. So Steinhoff put forward a plan, and now the shareholders have to vote on the plan. But what happened is that the facts of the plan, the underlying facts, changed dramatically in the last week when Steinhoff announced it is about to sell its shares in Mattress Firm. Now, one has to know Mattress Firm is one of the major assets of Steinhoff. It's worth between $4 to $5 billion dollars, and Steinhoff holds 50% stake in Mattress Firm, and announced now 8 days ago that they will sell it to Tempur Sealy International, and they will acquire now Steinhoff shares for a price of around $4 billion dollars. And this is really odd, because normally you wouldn't, when you are in such a short-running court proceedings with the voting period ends on the 24th, you wouldn't announce on the 9th that you are about to sell your major stake in a major company, because it changes the complete ground and facts that the shareholders and the creditors are supposed to vote on. So this is weird. It is not convincing, and it sheds another doubt and smells fishy in this whole Steinhoff process.
When you say it smells fishy, what do you mean by that?
We have learned from public filings that the buyer, so Tempur Sealy International, has spent for the last 6 to 9 months extensive monies on research if to buy the stake in Mattress Firm or not, has retained advisors if to buy Mattress Firm or not. So it seems to us that the decision process to selling Mattress Firm to Tempur Sealy has been going on for quite some time, 6 months. And only now, while this war proceeding started, and it's only running for 3 weeks, and in the midst of this war proceedings, there suddenly comes the information, hey, we're selling off a major stake from our assets, and the whole grounds of you judging if to vote for or against the planned restructuring, the offered restructuring plan, all these grounds now have changed. And this is this is something you wouldn't do. We are of the position that the whole war proceeding, this whole restructuring proceeding and the voting process has to start again, because major facts started while being in the voting process.
That $4 billion that Steinhoff is wanting to sell its stake in Mattress Firm, which is an American company, in fact, the final acquisition that USADA did, is that aligned with your valuation?
It's not aligned with our valuation. It's lower than our valuation. And we have doubts if this valuation is accurate that Steinhoff puts here forward. For instance, a major amount of the price is to be paid in shares by the buyer. So we have an evaluation question here. How much are actually the shares of the buyer? And then it is quite interesting that the transaction that Steinhoff now puts forward is expected to close only in the second half of 2024. Now, one would say, hey, a transaction that is about to close in the second half of 2024, that's in 1.5 years, and it's not finalized today, and it's not closed today, but has to be closed in 1.5 years, such a transaction that is not finalized and not certain as of today cannot be grounds for a valuation. So that is the reason why the price that was transported and disseminated or published, let's say by Steinhoff for this Mattress Firm share, we think that this is not a price that can be grounds for a valuation.
Dr. Liebscher, after our last conversation, I had a call from a hedge fund manager who said they approached you and they asked you to share the valuation, your valuation with them. And then you said to them, no, you're going to have to pay for that. Just explain what is going on there, because the hedge fund manager said to me, you see, they aren't well capitalized. They haven't really done their homework yet. And this proves it.
Well, we are an NGO. We are very badly capitalized. We are not an hedge fund. We are working for free here. We are doing this on an NGO basis, on a volunteer basis. And our finances are easily, we publish our finances on our website and in the registrar, and you will see that we have a very, very bad capitalization because we don't make any money. So that is the reason why we told the hedge fund, hey, you want to see the valuation that we paid for dearly. We paid significant money for that. You want to see that money, and you are a hedge fund, then you have to pay a share in the costs. And the hedge fund expecting us, NGO, to pay for a valuation by American professionals and give that to the hedge fund for free, I think it's a ridiculous expectation, isn't it?
So you have done the valuation. It isn't a question
we have commissioned a valuation, and we have paid for that valuation. And this valuation we do have, yeah, sure. And we have talked to Steinhoff about this valuation. We have talked to the observers. These are professionals who are assigned by the court to observe this voting period. And we have presented this valuation to the observers. The US professionals who did the valuation, we had extensive calls with the observers. So this valuation is there, and anybody who wants to see it and is on an NGO basis fighting for shareholders as volunteers on NGO basis, yes, we can easily talk and try to share information. But super professional hedge funds who have their own money, they will not get stuff that we paid for, our shareholders paid for dearly. They will not get that for free, no.
But you would presumably give that valuation to the judge if it is needed.
Yes, sure. We present this valuation in the court, in the VOA court proceedings. Yeah, we will put that report evaluation. We will put that forward in the court proceedings and evaluation. And it's kind of Alec. I have to say that we were in touch with this hedge fund. Asked us if we could provide them with the valuation, and we said yes, you could have that valuation, but we want a share of costs. And they never came back to us. So they're just looking out there for a free meal.
And just to confirm so that we all understand this, the valuation, how much higher is it than the figure that Steinhoff is wanting shareholders to believe?
first we have to be frank that the valuation we have only can touch on publicly available information. Steinhoff is not answering any questions to us. For instance, they have management projections, how the different companies they own will develop in the coming years. We were not provided with these management projections. We asked for several times for these management projections. So what we have is we lack very substantial information. And on that ground, we had to do the valuation. So this is a caveat we have to be clear. And what our valuation is coming from a going concern. We are of the opinion that Steinhoff will not sell the shares in Pepcore and Mattress Firm in trunks of 5-10%. So we are of the opinion they should sell these shares in one huge trunk, in one huge group, and then the buyer acquires not a majority but a large packet of shares. And this changes the share price and the prices buyers are willing to give for these shares. So our valuation comes to a range. So we are landing on some figure, but I think it's a range, and our range is that the valuation of Steinhoff is about up to 15% higher than his actual debt. So the debt right now would be 10 billion. So our valuation comes to the conclusion that the valuation of Steinhoff could be up to 11.5 billion. But as I said, we lack substantial information that we are not being provided by Steinhoff. And we've been asking for that information now for 4 or 5 months, and they're not willing to present this information.
So the next step for shareholders of Steinhoff who believe that you're on the right horse here is to vote against the proposal that is being put before the Amsterdam court, and that once that has succeeded, which appears as though it's got a pretty good chance given what happened at the annual general meeting, then a judge will be provided with your valuation and would then have to make a decision on whether you're right or whether the Steinhoff management are right. But let's just assume that you're right. Let's assume that the judge says, right, the valuation that's been done in New York, or in America rather, by your advisors there is correct. It is 11.5 billion versus 10 billion euros.
Right, it doesn't
what
have
happens
to be.
then? What happens then?
Thank you for that. Just to make it clear, doesn't have to be that Steinhoff is 11.5 billion. I think we are good when we raise serious doubts in the judge that the shareholders are in the money. If there are in the money 100 million or 1.5 billion, that's not of importance. We are convinced that once the judge thinks, hey, the valuation Steinhoff put forward is not accurate, then the judge will vote, hey, the VOA proceedings are invalid. We do not accept the VOA proceedings, and the voting of the shareholders is upheld, and the VOA restructuring plan has failed.
What happens then?
That would be the outcome. Then Steinhoff would have to negotiate with the creditors to postpone the maturity date of the bonds, of the debt. Maturity still is 30th of June, and Steinhoff tries to push through with the restructuring before 30th of June. So Steinhoff would have to push the maturity date with the debtors after the 13th of June, and would have to come up with a better restructuring proposal that sees the creditors in the money. So the whole process of negotiating would restart again, but this time the shareholders would be involved and would have a seat on the table and be able to negotiate the restructuring plan also from the shareholders' point of view.
But would the shareholders want different people negotiating on their behalf, i.e. the management who are there right now believe one thing, shareholders believe something different? Would you need to change management to do this?
There are calls to change management, to call for an extraordinary shareholders meeting to change the management. We are not convinced this is feasible at the moment because there are time pauses and procedures that have to be obeyed, which leads to possibility to change management through an extraordinary shareholders meeting only in a couple of months. So to change management, we don't see that option as feasible at the moment. the shareholders would have to come up with a representative or with some people who think that they are or can show they are major shareholders. And then these representatives or these major shareholders, in the name of the shareholders, could try to negotiate and then try to sell it to the rest of the shareholders.
But everything's coming to a head by next Wednesday, the 24th of May. And that would be the big line in the sand, which, are you confident that shareholders will support you, that you'll get your 50%?
I think we can be quite confident that the shareholders will vote in their group with a majority against the plan. What we think will be very, very important, and the line in the sand will be the court hearing, and if we can persuade the judge to have doubts in the restructuring proposal put forward by Steinhoff. We think this court hearing, that will be the most important day.
Dr. Marc Liebscher is a lawyer and member of the board at the Association for the Protection of Investors in Germany. I'm Alec Hogg from BizNews.com.